The wind howled across the Pacific coast, rattling the windows of the Fairmont Pacific Rim Hotel in downtown Vancouver, where the Whitmore wedding had just drawn the city's elite together under a canopy of roses and crystal chandeliers. It was the kind of evening that made headlines in glossy lifestyle magazines: a son of one of Canada's wealthiest families marrying a schoolteacher whose grace and determination had captured his heart. It should have been perfect. But beneath the shimmer of champagne and candlelight, something darker simmered, hidden behind a mother-in-law's smile. Emily, 26 and radiant in her lace gown, sat at the head table with Daniel Whitmore, the man she had promised to spend her life with. He laughed with old friends across the room, the sound warm and untroubled. Emily tried to mirror his joy, but her eyes kept drifting to the woman beside her. Victoria Whitmore, formidable matriarch of the Whitmore family, wore elegance like armor. Diamonds glistened at her throat, her posture rigid, her smile fixed in place. From the moment Daniel had introduced Emily 2 years ago, Victoria had made her disapproval clear. Emily was not from their world. She lacked the pedigree, the social circles, the name that opened doors. A teacher from Halifax, raised in a modest home, could never, in Victoria's eyes, be enough for her son. The reception swirled around them: laughter, speeches, the clinking of glasses. But for Emily, time slowed to a crawl when Victoria's hand lingered above her champagne flute. It was a subtle motion, almost invisible, masked by the flourish of a napkin. But Emily saw it: the tiny flick of fingers, the drop of something unseen falling into her glass. Her heart stopped. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it. The chandeliers glittered, the music swelled, and the world carried on as if nothing had happened. But Emily's breath caught in her throat. She could not mistake the intent in Victoria's movements. The best man rose, lifting his glass for the toast. Around the room, guests followed, crystal stems catching the golden light. Emily's hands shook as she stared at the poisoned champagne before her. Panic flooded her chest. Should she speak? Call out the matriarch of one of Vancouver's most powerful families in front of 200 witnesses? If she was wrong, she would look hysterical, paranoid. But if she was right? Her mind raced. In a split second, while Victoria turned to greet a guest, Emily slid the glasses across the table, smoothly, silently. Her own flute replaced with Victoria's, indistinguishable except for the truth Emily alone knew. The toast rang out, to Daniel and Emily. Voices echoed the blessing, glasses rose, and Victoria, oblivious, drank deeply from the glass that had once been Emily's. Emily lifted the other glass to her lips, her stomach coiled in knots. She took the smallest sip possible, her eyes never leaving Victoria. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. Conversation flowed, music played, plates were cleared. Emily began to doubt herself. Maybe it had been nothing at all. Then Victoria stood. Her smile widened, her eyes glassy. She swayed slightly, laughter bubbling up from her throat, strange, uncharacteristic, unsettling. Compliments spilled from her lips, directed at Emily, words she had never spoken before. "You look like a princess," she slurred. "A perfect little princess." Gasps rippled as the matriarch of Vancouver's high society kicked off her heels and stumbled toward the dance floor. She twirled clumsily, her silk gown sweeping the floor, her laughter high and unhinged. Guests stared in disbelief. Phones were raised. Cameras flashed. Within minutes, the wedding of the year had descended into chaos. Victoria seized the microphone, rambling about love and loyalty before breaking into song, an off-key rendition of a Beyoncé hit, her arms flailing as the band faltered behind her. Then, in a moment that would replay across the internet for weeks, she climbed onto the cake table. Emily's breath caught. No, but it was too late. Victoria spun, slipped, and crashed into the towering wedding cake. Frosting exploded across the room. The matriarch sat stunned in a heap of buttercream and fondant, her gown ruined, her reputation unraveling in front of Vancouver's elite. And Emily sat frozen, her champagne glass still in her hand, knowing with bone-deep certainty her mother-in-law had tried to poison her, and fate had turned the scheme against its maker. The room erupted into noise gasps, laughter, horrified whispers. Guests scrambled to record the spectacle, their phones capturing every humiliating second as Victoria flailed in the ruins of the cake. Daniel rushed forward, his face pale with embarrassment, trying to pull his mother to her feet, but she waved him off, frosting smeared across her jeweled sleeves. "I'm having fun," she cried, her words slurring. "This is a celebration dance with me, Daniel." Her husband, Richard Whitmore, the patriarch of the family, stormed through the crowd with fury etched across his face. He grabbed her arm, hissing words none could hear, but she pulled away, climbing back onto the wobbling table. The crowd gasped again as the expensive crystalware trembled dangerously. Emily felt her stomach twist tighter. She knew. Whatever had been in that champagne, it had worked. It was supposed to be her up there confused, humiliated, degraded. Instead, the poison had sunk its claws into Victoria. Sophia, Emily's closest friend and bridesmaid, slipped into the seat beside her, voice hushed. "Emily, what on earth is happening? This isn't normal. She looks drugged." Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. She couldn't tell Sophia everything, not yet, not without proof. But her eyes flicked to the champagne glass still on the table. Victoria's original flute, barely touched. The faint residue clung to the crystal, shimmering under the lights. "That glass," Emily whispered. "Don't let anyone take it." Sophia blinked, realization dawning. She covered the stem with a napkin and slid it discreetly away from the servers who were rushing to clear plates. "Got it," she murmured. "But Emily, if you're right about what I think you're right about, this is attempted poisoning. That's a crime." The music faltered as Victoria seized the microphone again, rambling about love, betrayal, and her beautiful boy. Laughter rippled through the guests, though many shifted uncomfortably. It was grotesque, surreal, the city's most admired matriarch unraveling before their eyes. Half an hour later, security and family managed to wrestle Victoria from the reception hall, frosting trailing in her wake. The ruined cake sat like a corpse in the center of the ballroom. Guests whispered, scandalized, their eyes darting between Emily and Daniel, between the bride who sat in stunned silence, and the groom who looked as though his entire world had collapsed. The celebration staggered on, but the magic had been ripped away. Every toast, every laugh, every song was underscored by the memory of Victoria's breakdown. Emily forced herself to dance, to smile, to carry the weight of appearances, but inside, her thoughts churned. She saw again the flicker of Victoria's hand above her glass, the twitch of fingers, the subtle drop. She replayed it over and over in her mind, the certainty hardening into something immovable. She hadn't imagined it. She hadn't been paranoid. Her mother-in-law had tried to ruin her. Maybe worse. By the end of the night, Daniel was pale and distracted, his tie loosened, his laughter forced. When he finally sank into a chair beside Emily, he whispered, "I don't know what's happening to her. She's never done anything like this before." Emily swallowed hard. Her heart begged her to speak the truth, but her mind held her back. On their wedding night, surrounded by whispers and eyes, she could not yet. Later, in the bridal suite, after the last guests had drifted away and the city lights glittered against the harbor, Emily stood alone by the window, her veil discarded, her gown heavy with fatigue. Daniel lay collapsed on the bed, already half asleep, his phone buzzing endlessly with messages from concerned relatives. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out the napkin-wrapped champagne flute Sophia had pressed into her hand. She held it up to the moonlight, staring at the faint bubbles clinging to the bottom. The ghost of something unseen dissolved within, Her fingers tightened around the stem. This was proof. Proof of everything she had witnessed. Proof of the darkness that lurked beneath Victoria's perfect smile. And with that proof came a chilling certainty. Her wedding had not been the happiest day of her life. It had been the beginning of a war. Sleep did not come easily. Emily lay awake, the soft hum of the city outside mocking her exhaustion. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Victoria's hand above her glass, the drop falling, the smirk hidden behind polished civility. The images looped in her mind like a nightmare she could not escape. By dawn, the story had already begun to spread. Clips of Victoria's collapse, her bizarre dancing, her fall into the wedding cake had flooded social media. Hashtags trended across Twitter and Instagram, #Whitmore wedding, #mother-in-law meltdown, #CakeGate. Some laughed, others pitied, but none knew the truth that lay beneath the spectacle. Emily scrolled through the footage on her phone, her stomach twisting tighter with each replay. The world saw entertainment, she saw attempted destruction. Daniel stirred beside her, groaning as he reached for his phone. The light from the screen illuminated the weariness etched into his features. "It's everywhere," he whispered. "The papers, the news, the blogs, my mom." His voice cracked. "What's happening to her?" Emily hesitated. She wanted to speak, to unload the truth pressing against her chest. But he was fragile, his loyalty torn, his heart unwilling to accept what she had seen. So she simply placed a hand over his and said, "We'll figure it out." Later that morning, Sophia arrived at their suite, her face pale, her tone urgent. She set the champagne flute on the desk with deliberate care. "Emily, we can't just ignore this. Whatever was in that glass, it needs to be tested. This isn't just scandal, it's criminal." Emily nodded, her throat dry. The weight of the decision pressed down on her. If she handed over the glass, the truth would spill into the open, tearing the family apart. If she stayed silent, she risked being accused herself should the story twist against her. Either way, her life was no longer her own. The knock at the door startled them. Richard Whitmore stood in the hallway, his expression thunderous. "Emily," he said sharply, ignoring Sophia's presence. "You will keep quiet about last night. Do you understand me? Victoria was unwell. Nothing more. If you value this family, you will not entertain gossip or wild accusations." Emily's pulse raced, but she forced her voice steady. "I didn't say anything." "See that you don't." His gaze flicked to the champagne flute on the desk, lingering for a dangerous second before he turned on his heel and left. When the door shut, Sophia exhaled shakily. "He knows." Emily clutched the flute tighter. "Then we need to move faster." That evening, as the sun dipped into the Pacific, casting Vancouver in hues of gold and crimson, Emily stood alone on the balcony. The chill air stung her cheeks, but she welcomed it. It reminded her she was still alive, still standing, still capable of fighting back. She thought of her students in Halifax, the laughter of children echoing through small classrooms. She thought of the quiet life she had left behind, exchanged for the glittering chaos of the Whitmores. She thought of Daniel, the man she loved, caught between loyalty to his mother and truth. And she thought of Victoria, her cold smile, her perfect facade, her desperation to destroy what she could not control. Emily lifted her chin against the wind. She had not asked for this war, but it had found her nonetheless, and she would not back down. The wedding was over. The battle had begun. The morning after the wedding should have been filled with laughter, photographs, and quiet relief that the months of planning had finally paid off. Instead, the Whitmores awoke to scandal. Victoria Whitmore lay in a private suite at Vancouver General Hospital. Her once impeccable composure shattered. The doctors ran blood tests, frowning at the results that showed traces of sedatives mixed with alcohol. They whispered about high doses, unprescribed medication, dangerous interactions. Richard had demanded silence, snapping at every nurse, insisting it was a simple allergic reaction or a fainting spell exaggerated by gossip, but whispers could not be stopped. Emily sat by the window, her gown replaced with a simple coat, her face pale from exhaustion. She had not slept. The image of Victoria's hand hovering above her champagne glass replayed endlessly in her mind, an unshakable reminder of what had truly happened. Beside her, Sophia guarded the champagne flute wrapped in napkin, hidden in her purse. "This is our proof," she whispered. "We take it to the lab, we'll know for sure." Emily shook her head, fear twisting her gut. "If I do that, Daniel will have to choose, his mother or me. And if he doesn't believe me..." Sophia's eyes hardened. "He'll believe you when the evidence is undeniable. You can't bury this, not when she tried to bury you." The hospital corridors buzzed with reporters. Already, videos of the wedding chaos had gone viral. Victoria's stumbling, her shrill singing, her fall into the cake. Strangers laughed across the internet, dissecting the downfall of Vancouver's most formidable socialite. But the headlines sharpened. Was she drunk? Was she drugged? Who is to blame? By midday, detectives arrived. They questioned the staff, spoke with guests, requested toxicology reports. Richard intercepted them, his tone clipped and imperious. "My wife suffered an unfortunate episode. That is all. You vultures will not exploit this family's grief." But Emily noticed the detectives' exchanged glance. They had heard denials before. They knew when a family was hiding something. Daniel finally collapsed into a chair beside her, his hand trembling as he reached for hers. "I don't know what to believe," he whispered. "My mother, she's proud, controlling, but she would never..." His words trailed off, unfinished, unconvincing even to himself. Emily squeezed his hand but said nothing, not yet. That evening, Victoria stirred awake. Her eyelids fluttered, her lips dry, her voice hoarse. Emily stood at the edge of the bed, heart pounding. Victoria's gaze drifted, unfocused at first, then sharp as a blade when it landed on her daughter-in-law. "You," she rasped, barely audible. "You ruined it. I had it planned perfectly. And you switched." Emily froze. Her pulse roared in her ears. "What did you say?" she whispered. But Richard stormed into the room, snapping at the nurses. "Enough questioning. She needs rest." He glared at Emily, his eyes cold. "Leave." Emily obeyed outwardly, retreating with measured steps. But inside, her certainty crystallized. Victoria had confessed, even in her haze. That night, Emily sat alone in the hotel, the city lights twinkling across the harbor. Daniel paced, consumed by calls from relatives and investors worried about the family's name. Sophia sat across from Emily, the champagne flute safe between them. "You heard her," Sophia said softly. "She admitted it." Emily nodded, tears brimming. "If I expose her, Daniel loses his family. If I stay silent, I lose myself." Sophia leaned forward, her voice steady. "Then you already have your answer." The days that followed grew darker. Headlines multiplied. Talk shows replayed the cake collapse with gleeful commentary. Anonymous sources whispered of pills, of secrets, of a perfect image cracking. The Whitmore's empire trembled. Richard raged. Daniel withdrew, and Emily, caught in the storm's eye, held her silence only until the detectives returned. They sat across from her in a quiet hospital room, their notebooks open. "Mrs. Whitmore," one said gently, "do you know of anything unusual that occurred before the toast?" Emily's hand tightened on her lap. She felt Daniel's eyes on her, pleading, terrified. And yet, she lifted her chin, her voice, though soft, carried the weight of truth. "Yes," she said, "I saw my mother-in-law put something in my glass." Silence filled the room. Richard's breath hissed in fury. Daniel's face crumpled, but Emily did not waver. The war she had dreaded had begun. The detectives pressed for details. Emily's voice trembled. but each word carried conviction. She described the flicker of Victoria's hand, the small object dropping into her glass, the desperate choice to switch them. Sophia corroborated her account, producing the champagne flute wrapped in its napkin. The officers exchanged a look that was neither shock nor disbelief, merely confirmation. They had suspected as much. One took the glass with gloved hands, tagging it for analysis. "If there's residue, we'll know soon enough," he said. Richard erupted. "This is madness. She's lying to protect herself, to elevate her status. My wife was the victim here." But Daniel said nothing. His silence was worse than accusation. His eyes darted between Emily and his father, his loyalty torn in two. That night, the hospital filled with whispers. Staff muttered of sedatives found in Victoria's blood. Reporters hounded the entrance. The story spiraled beyond control, no longer a family embarrassment but a citywide scandal. Emily endured the storm in quiet defiance. She sat by Victoria's bedside once more, listening as the older woman, still disoriented, muttered in fevered half-dreams. "She thinks she's won, but I'll show her. I'll show them all." It was enough to know her instincts were right, enough to prove the war was not imagined. Days passed. The toxicology report returned lorazepam, in doses too high to be accidental. Combined with alcohol, it explained the erratic behavior, the collapse, the humiliating display. The champagne glass confirmed its sedative residue clung to the crystal, its fingerprint undeniable. The detectives returned. They asked more questions, sharper now. Richard tried to block them, but the walls were closing in. His power, so formidable in boardrooms and ballrooms, crumbled against the weight of science and law. Daniel broke first. In a quiet corridor, away from the press, he turned to Emily, his eyes bloodshot. "Tell me again. Tell me everything." She did, slowly, painfully. She laid out each detail. How Victoria had despised her from the start. The dinners where ex-girlfriends were paraded like trophies. The subtle insults. The postponed wedding plans. The cold disdain. And finally, the poisoned toast. Daniel listened, silent tears streaking his face. When she finished, he whispered, "I want to believe you. God, I want to, but she's my mother. She's my—" Emily touched his hand. "And I'm your wife. Which truth will you choose?" The question lingered in the sterile air, heavy as stone. On the fourth day, the police moved. They filed their report, citing attempted poisoning and reckless endangerment. Victoria was officially under investigation. The fallout was immediate. The Whitmore name, once untouchable, was splashed across every paper in British Columbia. Socialite suspected in wedding day. Poison plot. Power. Pills. And poison. The Whitmore scandal unfolds. Business partners distance themselves. Charity boards cut ties. Invitations evaporated. In the family's penthouse, Richard shouted into phones, threatening lawsuits, demanding silence. Daniel retreated into himself, a man torn between blood and love, and Emily, quiet but resolute, prepared for the storm still to come, because she knew this was only the beginning. The investigation gathered momentum like an avalanche. Within days, Vancouver's once idolized Whitmore family became the subject of relentless scrutiny. News vans camped outside their residence. Paparazzi crowded the hospital entrances. And gossip sites devoured every scrap of rumor. The footage of Victoria, barefoot and smeared with frosting, remained on loop across the nation. Some laughed, others gasped. But all wanted more. Detectives moved methodically, their notebooks filled with accounts from waitstaff, musicians, guests, and hotel staff. The story was chillingly consistent. Victoria had hovered over Emily's glass. Victoria had drunk deeply during the toast. Victoria had spiraled into erratic chaos that ended with buttercream and scandal. Richard tried to spin it a medical episode, stress, an unfortunate accident, but his words rang hollow. The toxicology spoke louder, lorazepam in dangerous quantities, residue on the champagne glass. The case was no longer speculation, it was evidence. Emily lived each day beneath a spotlight. Strangers whispered when she walked past, some offering sympathy, others suspicion. Was she the dutiful bride, or the scheming daughter-in-law who had brought down a dynasty? Online forums buzzed with theories. She avoided the news when she could, but it seeped in through every crack. Sophia remained her anchor, reminding her of the truth. You saw it. You switched the glasses. You survived because you trusted yourself. Don't let their noise drown that out. But the hardest part was Daniel. He grew quieter by the day. His shoulders bowed beneath invisible weight. At night he sat in the darkened hotel room, scrolling through endless news articles, his expression hollow. "She's my mother," he whispered again and again, as if repeating it would rewrite the evidence. Emily sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his, but she knew the war inside him was one she could not fight for him. Then came the first interrogation of Victoria herself. Detectives entered her hospital room with recorders and questions sharp as blades. Victoria greeted them with icy civility, her posture regal despite the hospital gown. When asked about the champagne, she tilted her head and smiled thinly. "It was Emily," she said calmly. "She switched the glasses. She wanted me humiliated. You must understand. She's been manipulating my son since the day they met. She knew she would never be enough on her own. So she crafted this spectacle to destroy me." Emily, listening from the hall, felt her chest tighten. The venom in Victoria's voice was unmistakable. But the detectives were unmoved. "Mrs. Whitmore, witnesses place your hand over her glass. Toxicology shows sedatives in your system. Can you explain that?" Victoria's lips tightened. "My sister's medication must have been mishandled. Perhaps I was exposed accidentally, or perhaps Emily herself planned this to frame me. You can't trust her." The detectives scribbled in silence, but Emily could read their eyes. They had heard denials before, and this one reeked of desperation. The backlash was swift. News outlets reported her accusations, spinning headlines like "Whitmore matriarch claims, frame up by bride." Talk shows dissected her words, debating whether Victoria was delusional or cunning. Online battles raged, Team Emily versus Team Victoria. The scandal had transcended gossip. It had become national theater. Daniel cracked under the weight. One evening, his voice broke as he asked Emily, "What if she's right? What if you switched them on purpose?" His words stabbed like knives. Emily's face burned with betrayal. "You think I wanted to humiliate myself on my wedding day? You think I poisoned my own toast?" Her voice trembled, equal parts grief and fury. He buried his face in his hands. "I don't know what to think anymore." The chasm widened. Trust became fragile, stretched taut between them. Emily knew that if it snapped, everything she had fought for would collapse. But the universe had its own timing. 3 days later, detectives returned with a warrant. The evidence had mounted beyond denial. Victoria Whitmore, matriarch of Vancouver High Society, was placed under arrest for attempted poisoning, assault, and reckless endangerment. The click of handcuffs echoed through the hospital corridor as cameras flashed. Reporters screamed questions. Richard shouted threats. Daniel stood frozen, his face pale as his mother was led past him, her chin high, her eyes blazing with hatred. As she passed Emily, Victoria's lips curled. "This isn't over," she hissed. But for the first time, Emily did not flinch. She held her gaze steady, her heart pounding with both fear and triumph. The headlines exploded that night. Whitmore matriarch arrested in poisoned champagne. Case, High Society's darkest hour. Bride accuses mother-in-law of attempted poisoning. Vancouver buzzed with the scandal. The Whitmore empire teetered. And Emily lay awake knowing part 3 of her life's nightmare was only the prelude to the trial that loomed ahead. Winter settled deep over Vancouver as the trial opened, the city draped in steel skies and snow-dusted streets. Crowds thronged the courthouse steps, their breath visible in the frigid air, their cameras flashing like lightning. The name Whitmore, once uttered with admiration in boardrooms and ballrooms, now appeared on every headline with scandalous weight. Poisoned champagne, mother-in-law on trial, high society's fall. Emily arrived wrapped in a dark coat, her hair tied back, her face calm though her stomach twisted. At her side, Daniel walked as though the world's weight bent his shoulders. Yet he remained with her, their silence a fragile alliance. Sophia, steadfast as ever, carried folders of evidence, the guardian of the truth they had fought to preserve. Inside, the courtroom was stark, devoid of the glamour that once surrounded Victoria Whitmore. She entered flanked by guards, her tailored navy suit immaculately pressed, her diamonds absent. She held her head high, but her eyes betrayed her hard, defiant, rimmed with shadows. The jury watched her carefully, already familiar with her public collapse. The prosecution moved like clockwork. They laid out the toxicology reports, the champagne flute with residue, the footage of Victoria's hand lingering above Emily's glass, the testimony of Beverly about her missing pills, each piece stacked upon the last, a fortress of fact that no denial could topple. Emily listened, her pulse racing as her wedding was dissected with surgical precision. No music, no flowers, no laughter, only evidence, time-stamped and cold. When Victoria took the stand, her mask cracked. At first, her voice was smooth, rehearsed. She painted herself as victim, a loving mother betrayed, a woman framed by a manipulative daughter-in-law. She claimed Emily had switched the glasses deliberately, staging humiliation to discredit her. But under cross-examination, the walls closed in. The prosecutor pressed her on the footage, the toxicology, the missing medication. Her answers frayed, her tone sharpened, and then fury erupted. "That girl has ruined my family," she shouted, pointing at Emily, her composure collapsing in front of judge and jury. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge's gavel thundered for order. But Victoria continued, spitting venom. "She bewitched my son, turned him against me, destroyed everything I built. I tried to protect him. I tried to save him." The prosecutor's voice cut like ice. "So you admit you acted against her at the wedding?" Silence. The jury leaned forward. The courtroom held its breath. Victoria's lips trembled, her chest heaving. She had confessed enough. From that moment, the trial's course was set. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They returned with verdicts of guilty on all charges: attempted poisoning, assault, reckless endangerment. The judge's words were sharp as stone. "Mrs. Whitmore, you sought to humiliate and endanger your daughter-in-law out of pride and cruelty. You have shown no remorse, only deflection and blame. For these reasons, I sentence you to 3 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 18 months, and restitution of $40,000 for damages." The gavel struck. The room exhaled as if the sound had freed it. Victoria's face went pale. Guards rose at her sides. She kept her chin high, but her eyes burned with hatred as they fell upon Emily. "You'll never escape me," she hissed. Emily did not flinch. She whispered back, steady as stone, "You destroyed yourself." The world outside devoured the story. News outlets plastered her mugshot across screens. Gossip columns chronicled the downfall of the once untouchable matriarch. And late-night hosts mocked the Cakegate poison plot. The Whitmore empire crumbled. Richard filed for divorce, selling their Shaughnessy estate and retreating into obscurity. Daniel wept for the mother he lost. But his loyalty shifted at last. He chose Emily. By spring, they left Vancouver. Halifax became their refuge, its salty air and quiet harbor a balm after chaos. Emily returned to teaching, her laughter filling classrooms once more. Daniel took steady work outside the family empire, free from the burden of the Whitmore name. In time, they welcomed a daughter, Sophie, her giggles chasing away the last shadows of the poisoned champagne. The scandal never fully died. Occasionally, a clip of Victoria's meltdown resurfaced online, her wild dance, her fall into cake, her arrest replayed with mocking captions when karma serves itself. Emily no longer shuddered. She had lived through it, survived it, and learned from it. Sometimes, in the stillness of Halifax nights, she remembered that flicker of a hand above her glass. That moment of instinct, of survival, had changed everything. It was not revenge she had sought, only protection. Yet fate had turned the scheme upon its maker with poetic justice. And so Emily carried forward a lesson carved into her bones. You do not always need to destroy those who seek to harm you. Sometimes, you need only to step aside and let them destroy themselves. Thank you for watching and welcome to the Revenge Diaries. If you enjoyed this story, we'd truly appreciate a like and subscribe to keep us motivated to bring you more. Wishing you a wonderful and positive day ahead.